Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. It is Hand Tool Thursday and I want to go into one of my all-time favorite tools, the Stanley number 55 and the Stanley number 45, also known as combination planes. These are a lot of fun because they do a lot of different things, and every single one of these cutters can make a different profile, a different cut, and you can set these up to do different things. So I actually want to go into this and show a little bit more detail on these. Now, if you want to see even more than that, I do have a couple old videos where I go into detail on the 55 and I go into detail on the 45, and then I have another video where I can compare the two. What do they do? So I'm not going to be covering that information. I just want to be more introducing these today. So if you want to see that, I'll leave a link to those down below. But let's actually dive into these and see what all can they actually do. So the Stanley 55 and its little brother the 45 are known as combination planes. And the reason they're called combination planes is you can mix them up and make all sorts of different combinations to make all these different planes. It's said that the Stanley 55 can replace 55 molding planes in your shop. So one plane can do it all, but most of the time they end up being a plow plane because that's just the most common thing you're going to do is cut a groove or a dado or a rabbet, and so you can use these standard chisel cutters for that. So how exactly do these work? If you break them down, basically you have this one ski. This is a plane all in one, but it only has this one thin line that's the sole. On this you have a depth stop, so just like on a lot of your molding planes you have that. And then you have a depth adjuster here so you can actually slide the iron in and out. Then all mounts onto these two rails. And with these two rails you can put on other things. And then it has a second skate that you can put on, and this is basically another sole to make it wider. So if you're using a wider cutting surface, you can put one of these soles just inside of both sides of the cutting surface. Or if you're doing something like this beading plane, you can actually put one of the two skates on each of these points, so that the lowest point down has a support from the skate. Then we have a fence that we can slide on, and this has two sets of holes. Number one, I can put it on the lower holes, and this will slide on and actually slide right up against the iron. So it slides down there and sits right beside it, so you can move that in and out. Or number two, I can put it in the higher holes, and these will allow it to slide underneath the iron. So if you're cutting a rabbet with a 1-inch cutter, but you only need a 7/8 inch rabbet, you can actually move this fence in and make the rabbet a little bit smaller because part of it is being covered by the fence. The 55 does everything that the 45 will do, but then takes it a step further. Number one, it has a second fence, so if you want to sandwich a board, you can put this other fence on the other side. Number two, the fence is actually on a swivel, so if you want to ride on a board at an angle or you want to run up the corner of a board, you can pivot the fences to then sandwich the board on that angle. Then number three, the big thing that sets it apart, is the second skate on the 55 has an adjustment knob here that will actually move this skate in and out on these tracks. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to move one skate lower or higher than the other one. And you can see now how one skate is a good bit lower than the other one, or I can back them up and keep them even. The reason you'd want to do that is if you're using some complex molding plane like this, you need one skate that's going to be low down here. That's going to be the first point of contact as it's running along. And you need another skate up here, but you don't want that one down at the same depth, otherwise it's not going to be cutting. So you need to have two different skates at two different heights so that the sole will still support the iron as it runs through the cut. It also becomes fun if you want to cut around. If I put one skate on either side, this tongue is going to be sticking out so far it's going to be cutting a massive heavy cut every time, and not what you want to do. What we actually want to do is put one of the skates low towards the middle of the crown, and then the other one up here on the side. And that will still support this when it runs through the cut. So with a 55 you can do rounds, but with a 45 you can't because you can't move one of the skates down a little lower. Now the 45 or 55 would come with sets of irons like this. This would be the set for the 55, and this would be the set for the 45. And the 45 would normally come with several of your standard chisel cutters, which you can do your grooves, your rabbets, your dados. Then it would also have beading planes, so you can do all of your decorative beading. And then it would either have a tonguing plane, or it would have this sash iron, and this would be what you would use to create your window sashes. So you could run along this side, you'd have your decorative cove here, but then you'd also have your rabbet on the side that the glass would fit into. So this could do it all in one pass. But then the 55 would have all of your standard cutters, all of your beads. It would also have multiple bead cutters. It would have rounds. It would have hollows. It would have half rounds. It would have decorative OGs. And it would have your window trims, so you could do just like you did before with the sashes, as well as some of the more decorative cuts that you could do along with it. Now, rarely is anyone going to be using these decorative cuts, unless that's the type of thing you do a lot of. Most of the time, all of your cuts are going to be these standard chisel cuts, your rabbets, your grooves, your dados. 99% of the time, these are the chisels you're going to be using. Now I know no one is going to let me go without showing them exactly how this actually works, so let's do this decorative beading plane. This one's a little bit different, and this one could be used in the 45 or the 55, but for demonstration's sake I'm going to set it up here in the 55. And you put it in, there's a little notch here that fits into the depth adjuster, slide it into the groove here, and then you can adjust it to its depth so that it is just sticking out a little bit past the skate. Once the depth has been adjusted and you run it forward, then you can tighten up this on the back, and this will crank it down and actually suck it up against the sidewall of the skate here. And then we can slide in our second skate. Now in the 45, when you slide it in, it should be at the exact same height as the first one, but on this one we're probably going to have to adjust it a little bit to make sure that it's the same depth as the other one, because last time we may have adjusted this differently. To do that, we have to loosen up these knobs, and I usually just stick an Allen wrench in one of these holes, loosen this up, and this will allow me to adjust the depth in and out, and I can do that exactly as I did for moving the iron in and out, but this time I'm actually going to move the skate to adjust it to the iron. Once the depth has been adjusted, then we can tighten these back down and make sure that the skate is the correct distance in on either side of the iron. On this particular iron, I want the skates to be as far out to the sides as they can be so that they don't get into the grooves that we're going to be cutting for the bead. If I'm doing something like this standard chisel cutter, I'm actually going to move the skates in a little ways so it's an 1/8 inch or so into the middle of the iron. That way I'm not worrying about it running up against the side. Unless I'm cutting cross grain, and then I'm going to want the skates right up against the outside here because there's these nickers, these spurs that stick out, and these will cut the cross grain fibers so you can actually cut across the wood. But I don't do that a whole lot, but every now and then you need to cut a dado. Now that we have the skates set up, I can grab the fence and slide in on. And this is what adjusts how far in these beads are. Do I want them right up against the edge? Then I'm probably going to use the top holes and slide the fence in a little bit until it cuts underneath the iron. Or I can actually put it on the bottom hole and then set the beads in a certain distance from the edge of the wood, which I think I'm going to do here. I'm going to move them about a 1/2 inch away, just to play with it. And then for its use, it's just like any other molding plane. Some people like to start up here by the end and run off and work their way back along the board. I'm actually not a huge fan of that. I like to start all the way back at the end and just run all the way along and keep on going from there. Every now and then you'll get these bird's nests you just have to pluck out. Otherwise it starts to clog up. But that's the normal of molding planes. Here you can start to see how it's taking shape. Just going to keep going until we get these crowns just showing. Another pass or two. And then usually once I've gotten to this spot where I'm hitting my depth right here, I'm going to set the irons in there, and now I'm going to adjust my depth stop right up to it so that everything else will be at that spot. And so I'm just keeping an eye on it until the first section gets to the depth I want. And you just keep going until everything is down to that same depth all day long, and everything looks good, which I think I'm right about there. There we go. There's the nice bead all the way along. Now usually the next question I get is, okay, how do you actually sharpen all of these complex irons? Well, the nice thing is most of the time, you're just using these chisels. And they sharpen just like a chisel. You flatten the back and you sharpen the bevel. Booyah. But for most of these complex ones, I'm going to get a dowel and wrap some sandpaper around it and then sharpen it on the sandpaper. And I always make sure the dowel is a smaller diameter than this so I can focus on one point or another all the way across the iron. And then for that final touch-up, I'm going to grab a strop, bend it over, and do the exact same thing on the strop, just like I would do with a carving gouge to clean up the inside. And then it's ready to go. Now if you want to see more in depth, I do have an old video on how to sharpen these. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail on here because that's fairly straightforward, but you want to see that, it's down below in the description. So there you have it. There is a lot of fun you can do with the Stanley 45 and Stanley 55. And I know there are a lot more questions out there I didn't answer. This is more of an overview of what they can do and what the plane actually is. And every single cutter out there has its own little unique thing to it. So I could do an entire series where I go through and I demonstrate how do you do a sash plane, how do you do a grooving plane, how do you do all these different irons. But I'm not going to do that here. So if you want to see that, let me know. I might do that on my second channel. That might be kind of fun. But for now, that's about it. If you do want to see more detail, I'll have a link to the other videos down below where I go into a little bit more showing off some of the things that they can do and what are the differences between them. So if you want to see that, go down below. Now the next question I get is, where do you buy these? And so I like to ask people, what is your budget? And if your budget is kind of strapped, the base rate where you can begin is if you go online, you can usually find a Stanley 45 with most of the parts, one cutter, rusted, needing a bit of work, but still functional. You can find one of those for around $45, $50. And that's relatively common. The Stanley 55, on the other hand, those are pricey. And when you start talking about getting a Stanley 45 with all the parts, then the price goes up and up and up from there. A Stanley 45 in nice condition with all the parts could be $250. A Stanley 55 with all the parts and in a nice condition could be upwards of $500, $600. So they go up from there. The most common place I tell people to find them is at the Midwest Tool Collectors Association, and I'll leave a link to that down below. It is an association that is devoted to antique tools. That's probably where I bought 60 to 70% of all my tools. You do have to become a member of the association. It's $25 a year, and then you get invited to these meets, and they're all across the United States and several in other countries. And I have a link to my webpage where I list all of the locations of places I know of where you can buy hand tools. I'll leave that down in the description as well. So there you have it. This is just a fun tool, and every time I get a chance to use one of these, I'm excited because it's just a lot of fun to set up and play with and make that groove and make it work well. It's very, very happy. And there's a reason that the Stanley 55 is called the king of hand planes, because it is just that cool. It's the king of hand planes. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please let me know down below. Like, comment, subscribe. That really does help the channel out. If you have any questions, let me know down below. I do read all the comments, and I respond to most every one of them. So that's about it for today, and until next time, have a wonderful day. So a moving Philister plane and a beating plane married, and their offspring was a Stanley number 45. Then along came a hollow and a round, and they married up, and their offspring was a Stanley 55. There's a reason they're called combination planes.